Commander Star once believed humanity's violence was a rumor wrapped in bravado. Then a Marine flattened a champion in 6 seconds, and rumor calcified into doctrine. Across the fractured spiral of the Galactic Combat Federation, broadcast shards fed hungry markets. But the shockwave that mattered didn't tear through betting houses. It tore through recruiting offices, military academies, and every guild that wagered survival on predictable rules of biology. In the silence after the bell, power had changed hands in a universe that pretended power wore ceremonial armor. She arrived in that silence. Captain Ava Reyes UE Marine Recon. Call sign Greywind stepped through the crystalline access arch into the underbelly of the Proxima Wolf Arena, boots whispering on a floor polished by generations of spectacle. She wasn't here for spectacle. The Federation's board insisted the marine phenomenon be reproducible and statistically demonstrable. They wanted to prove that 6-second kill wasn't a fluke of anatomy or luck. They wanted to standardize fear. Ava had other priorities. Find the signal riding the broadcast carrier, the parasitic pattern that leached microseconds from combat mines and returned them as reaction gaps, a ghost error that only hunters could feel. Her mission, cover said, gladiatorial exhibition, but her orders were tighter. Identify, isolate, and eliminate the latency parasite. The arena's dome prismatic and perfect refracted starlight into a cathedral of color. Ava looked once, filed the angles and refractions for later, and kept moving. Her handler's brief had included a remark borrowed from her earliest drill instructor: don't stare at the lights. Predators prefer the shadow where throats live. In the practice galleries, species from 40 systems mimicked the human clip. Low entry, inside gate, 18-inch shock, choke collapse. Anthropologists called it the H6, and the name stuck faster than any official label. Ava watched a 4-armed Thari miss the line by a finger width and knew he'd die if he tried it live. The throat window wasn't a place. It was a time. Open for less than a blink. It required an economy of motion that human evolution had penciled into tendon and fascia across 1,000 hungry winters. The champion's corridor still smelled of antiseptic and pride. Gorvak's defeat had not ended the cult of size-nothing-ends ritual that quickly, but it had forced it to acquire another god. Ava ran her fingers over the edge of the crystalline wall and felt the micro tremble. The dome wasn't passive glass. It was a phased lattice tuned to amplify spectacle, and maybe something else. The parasitic latency had to anchor in infrastructure. She'd seen the after-action from Chun's 6-second match, frame by frame. The odd thing wasn't his speed. It was the arena's timing. The bell's wavefront hit different sectors at nanosecond offsets, enough to change the order in which nerves fired across a stadium full of species. Fairness, the board always said, was symmetrical optics, but fairness could be time. Her quarters were bare by regulation. Rack, locker, wash station, a triangle of privacy in a city of eyes. She unpacked the only contraband she dared bring, an old metronome with a scar through its brass face. Her grandmother's. The tick was imperfect, a living beat that wandered. Ava set it on the locker, wound it, and breathed with it until her pulse tracked its drift. Then she desensed. Hunters don't chase the herd rhythm. They step half a beat to the side. That was the trick no dome could tune out. The knock came as a low scrape. Star himself, all black carapace and careful posture, stood framed in refracted color. Captain Reyes, he said, mandibles clicking around the human syllables. The board appreciates your participation. It sounded like a threat made polite. Ava gestured him in. Seether's 4 eyes flicked to the metronome, to the etched scars on her knuckles, to the stillness in her shoulders, stillness that unnerved crowds, because it meant everything, was coiled in the places you couldn't see. We will host your exhibition against an appropriate challenger, he said, and we will ensure fairness. Ensure it by leaving time alone, Ava said. No phase tweaks to the chime, no sector biasing for sponsor suites, no microlag in the field sensors. The ether's pupils contracted. So, the rumor had reached them. Humans could smell time when it was being shaved. You think we would cheat? Star asked, softly. I think habits survive their gods, Ava said. Just as softly. She slept 3 hours, dreamed of running down wind-split plains under a red sky, lungs driving like furnaces, feet feral and sure. In the dream, she was not human as the Federation understood it. She was something older that wore human, like a well-loved blade wears a hilt. When she woke, she stretched spine to heel, then spent an hour on the H6 in a room with no mirrors. If the board wanted reproducibility, she would give them something worse. Inevitability. The challenger was announced as Vaskul of the Tharoon, compact, taller than Gorvok, lighter, faster, sheathed in elastic armor that rippled like water around muscle cords. He had beaten 3 of the Federation's mid-tier titlists in one night under a gravity skew, and his eyes stayed on center mass with predatory discipline. The crowd took to him because predators recognize one another, and because he smiled without showing teeth. Ava walked the tunnel alone. She didn't play to the crowd. The crowd was bait. Her eyes tracked light through crystal, the way the dawn threw rainbows into the air and hid the shadow lines that could teach you where to stand if you wanted to survive a storm of claws. At the gate she rolled her shoulders once, found the metronome in her breath, and let her face go calm. Calm is what happens when terror spends itself and leaves the body like spent powder. The bell would come. She knew it would arrive unevenly, whatever Tsar promised. That was fine. Hunters don't wait for permission to start. The arena lights bled into star sheen, bathing Vaskul in mercury glow. He rolled his neck, cords sliding under skin, and then the ritual began. A Tharoon flexion cascade, a pheromone flare, a low hum that set the air trembling. Spectacle breeds story. Story feeds sponsors. Sponsors warp rules with the invisible hand of attention. Ava planted the ball of her foot, set her breath, and edged her attention toward the bell, not the sound, but the pressure wave that would shove at her eardrums a fraction before the audible rang. She counted nothing. Counting is for ceremonies. Predators read when the chime struck. It reached Vaskul a sliver early. Ava felt the micro-startle ripple across his fascia. He moved first, because he heard first. Good. Ava had already moved where the wavefront was late. She wasn't trying to race the bell. She was trying to step off its grid. Vaskul came in with a slicing overhand pair that would have dismembered a slower apex, arms elongating as armor fluid stiffened across impact lines. Ava slipped the first and felt the second kiss hair at her crown. The crowd roared the way storms do when cliffs refuse to fall. Inside his guard, the textbook said, 18 inches to the throat. The galaxy mewed. But Vaskul had watched the 6-second gospel. He guarded the throat window with a twitch plate grown under the dermis, a living buckler engineered by scared money. He wanted her to aim there. So Ava lead. Her shoulder dipped a promise, and her hips wrote a different sentence. The strike started as a throat punch and ended as a spiral into the brachial plexus analog tucked behind Tharoon shoulder armor. Her knuckles didn't hit. Her ulna did, a short hammer that rang bone against nerve. Vaskul's right arms flickered. He recoiled on a vector she'd mapped before the chime. Ava rode it, knee slicing across the pelvic seam where Tharoon elasticity went rigid to transmit power rigidity that breaks if you feed it shearing force. He folded a fraction, never losing line, a predator refusing to be prey, even while his body argued with physics. Ava respected that refusal. Respect is not mercy. She checked the urge to go for the throat, not because she couldn't, but because killing myths isn't the same as winning fights. You kill myths by refusing their choreography. Vaskul adapted fast. The second exchange he came shallow, limbs shortened, armor phase shifted to diffuse point impact, and then he did what champions do. He changed the game. Tharoon hum rolled subsonic, syncing with lattice frequencies in the dome. The floor slicked half a micron. Movement tax introduced. Ava's boots told her the truth a beat before her vestibular system caught up. Sears Fairness had a sponsor. She widened her base, dropped her center, and let the metronome drift into a stutter that ruined lattice lock. Feet skated a whisper, then found grip. Vaskul lunged to capitalize, and found a human still there worse, closer. Ava's hands claimed his leftmost wrist, not to trap but to talk, and the conversation ran from tendon to tendon. Here is slack. Here is structure. Here is the lie your species tells itself about torque. She turned his arm a quarter degree at the elbow, and the rest of him followed in a body's miserable comedy. The crowd made a noise that meant they'd never seen that joint say yes where it should say no. She didn't chase the fall. Falls are bait in a ring. Instead, she struck the floor with her heel, just so, and watched the dome's lattice answer. There was the anchor Sector 7, sponsor tier, a timekeeper draped in optics. Not an AI, too sloppy. A person, or a guild of them, pushing phase to price outcomes. Ava let the knowledge settle. Not now. Not yet. Finish the fight, then cut the hand. Vaskal flashed teeth, which in his species was sincerity. He stopped trying to be the next Gorvik and started trying to be the first Vaskal. Smart. He sacrificed top speed for stability, accepted that the human would get inside, and chose endurance as the war. Humans were pursuit predators. The Rune were anchor sprinters. They could sustain power in pulses that flattened lesser species. But pulses rely on rhythm, and rhythm is where Ava lived. She broke his pulse every time it tried to form. Half-beat checks, shoulder bumps that stole breath, touches that rewrote proprioception. The fourth minute hung silver and hot. Sweat ran into Ava's eyes and carried salt that stung like honesty. Vaskal's hum faltered. She heard fear try to climb into his breath and watched him kick it back down. Good. She'd remember him. She gave him the window. He thought he wanted a throat line. An 18-inch myth, and he took it because predators take openings. He extended, and in that extension she placed the fight's end, not at his throat, but at the hinge of a life lived for speed. A palm strike to the lower mandibular anchor, off angle, feeding into Atlas, sending a lightning scream down a spinal road no engineer could fully map. His lights flickered. She caught him before he broke his head on the crystalline floor and laid him down like something valuable that needed to be returned intact. The bell's echo took longer to die than the fight had taken to end. The dome went quiet. Sponsors hate quiet. Ava lifted one hand, not in triumph, but in acknowledgement of Vaskal's honesty, of the crowd's hunger, of those fear dressed as fairness. Then she pointed one clean line at the sponsor tier in Sector 7. The cameras followed, because cameras are predators too. Somewhere behind reinforced optics, a guild of timekeepers forgot how to be invisible. When the med crew took Vaskal, he squeezed her wrist with a grip that said, "Thank you for not making me a myth." She squeezed back with a pressure that answered, "Thank you for trying to be real." Then she turned toward the corridors, where lights become shadows and shadows become work. The exhibition was over. The hunt was not. Thar met her under the dome's spine, where the structural ribs crossed like the sternum of a sleeping god. He did not pretend ignorance. "Sector 7, he said. "You point. Cameras point. Sponsors panic. The board calls me and uses the word integrity as if it were a weapon I had misplaced." Ava leaned against a pillar and let the cool bleed into hot skin. The air tasted ionized, too much field manipulation. "Pull your time, Guild," she said, "or I'll pull it for you, and the board will learn the difference between fairness and a feeding schedule." He studied her. "Mandibles still. Your species enjoys its new myth. Does it tire you to carry it?" Ava smiled the corner smile that comes with old scars. "Myth is a coat. It keeps the weather off. You don't sleep in it. You don't bleed in it. You take it off when it's time to run." Ether's pupils widened to see. Kadari expression. Humans had learned to read since the 6-second sermon rewrote etiquette. "Run to where?" he asked. "To the source," Ava said. "The phase hacks here aren't the disease. They're symptoms. Someone selling predictability across a network that was built for chaos. Hunters starve when prey knows the script." Ava's handler in her ear encrypted whisper over. Bone conduction gave her the location she already felt in her feet. A maintenance hub under the sponsor ring, converted into a timing chapel. The Federation called it Logistics NX7E. The Guild called it the Choir. The joke was obvious. They kept time. They sang profit into existence. She left Star with a nod and a warning. If he stood between her and the Choir, she'd treat him like any other obstacle made of bone and intention. He didn't stop her. He wasn't foolish. He was political, which is a different flavor of survival. The annex door required a code, which is to say it required a pulse of confidence applied to machinery designed by people who thought steel and numbers could refuse a determined predator. Ava went through it like water through sedge. Inside, the Choir wasn't robed. They were engineers and gamblers with the same eyes, watching a web of holographic phase maps projected from the dome's lattice. A woman at the center, sharp cheekbones, immaculate hands, watched Ava arrive and did not flinch. "Captain Reyes," she said, "I expected the Marine from the feed to be taller." "Expectations are where you die," Ava said. "Turn off your offsets." The woman tilted her head. "Offsets create fairness by correcting for species-specific perception lags. Without them, a Tharoon hears the bell before a Kthari before a human before a Vorth. We equalize the universe." Ava stepped closer until their breaths negotiated. "You sell outcomes. You equalize the sponsor's risk. You are shaving edges off chaos to make a safer god for money." The woman smiled without warmth. "Chaos sells once. Predictability sells subscriptions." She gestured to the lattice, and numbers floated like dust motes. Projected injuries, viral spikes, sentiment indexes. Humans moved the needle. We did what all markets do. We modeled them. Ava looked at the numbers and saw what the woman didn't. The models had begun to move the fighters. Not overtly, no mind control, no levers on nerves, but small pressures applied where living systems adapt. Air composition, humidity drifts, field texture. The dome had been whispering to muscles until those muscles learned to listen. If the choir kept singing, the galaxy's predators would dance to a song their bodies didn't choose. "Turn them off," Ava said again, "or I'll turn them off and break your fingers on the way out." Woman's eyes flicked to the guards she didn't have time to hire. "There are 4 of us and 1 of you," she said. Ava didn't bother with numbers. Numbers invite odds. Odds invite hesitation. Hesitation is where funerals live. She moved. The first engineer reached for an alarm and found his wrist in a geometry that notified his lungs of new priorities. The second tried a baton and learned that arcs are betrayed by shoulders. The third stayed very still and survived. The woman stood in place and didn't blink. "If I turn them off," she said, "the board will." Ava cut her off with a hand. "The board will say integrity again. They will call their lawyers, their sponsors, their gods. They will weep and then do what money always does, find a new song. But not here, not now." She handed the woman a drive-U tech burned through a civilian shell. "Install this. It randomizes phase offsets within a tolerance band and rotates seeds every 10 seconds. Based on cosmic microwave background noise. You keep your optics. You lose your lever." The woman stared at the drive like a verdict. "Why help me save my job?" "I'm not," Ava said. "I'm saving the hunt." The woman installed the drive with fingers that didn't quite tremble. The lattice maps blurred and then sharpened into a new kind of Order 1 that didn't point like a blade. Ava felt the dome exhale. Predators like it when the wind stops lying. News travels faster than light when fear carries it. By the time Ava left the choir's chapel, 3 systems had already spun the story into doctrine. Humans not only moved faster, they moved the rules under their feet. Star walked beside her in the maintenance corridor, an escort not for protection, but to prove he had chosen a side. "The board will feed on me for this," he said. "Let them," Ava answered. "You run an arena, not a temple, not a market. Fact and fear already pay your bills." They emerged into a concourse that smelled of victory food and antiseptic, a civilization's attempt to make violence taste like celebration. Ava paused at a vendor selling Tharoon bone sweet sugar lattice that melted like rain. She bought 2 and handed one to Zethar. He hesitated, then bit. The taste registered in his pupils. "Your species eats after killing," he said. "Before, during, after," Ava said. "Running burns fuel." Her cum-pinned handler again. The next exhibition had been scheduled, and not in this dome. The board wanted to scatter the myth across architectures, to prove that human inevitability survived translation. They chose the Halcyon Vault over Rigel Minor, a deep well arena built into an asteroid's iron heart, where gravity swelled and receded like breath. The audience loved the vault because every step cost something. The board loved it because the choir had cousins there. Ava slept in transit on a marine courier, stuffed with machine empathy and caffeine. She woke to the straps hugging her shoulders and the void stretching like a long black river outside the viewport. The ship huffed attitude jets and settled into a docking tunnel with the delicate violence only good pilots can manage. Halcyon greeted her with steel and ritual. Posters of champions lined the accessway, their eyes following with the predatory courtesy of those who respect blood. Her opponent here was not a sprinter. He was a climber, the fourth shaman athlete Room, limbs roped like ship cable, skin the gray of old storms. He had never lost in the vault because he understood its breath. He could feel gravity under his feet, the way humans feel weather on their skin. The board picked him because he did to gravity what humans did to time. He listened. The vault's keeper, a woman with forearms like carved basalt, gave Ava the brief. Gravity modulation schedule, safety band limits, medical crew drills. Ava asked for the metronome of the vault, the raw schedule, not the sanitized version for broadcast. The keeper lifted an eyebrow. Most fighters let the ring tell them when to move. I don't let domes talk to my nerves, Ava said. The keeper nodded once. Respect paid in the coin creditors used. In the locker. Ava set her grandmother's metronome on the bench. Gravity thickened for a breath, then thinned, then thickened again in a heartbeat that wasn't regular, but was honest. She matched it, not to sink as surrender, but to learn it well enough to contradict it without slipping. She taped her wrists, not for support, but to remind her hands there was work to be held and released. Rune met her at center ring, bare feet on iron that had seen enough blood to remember names. He touched his chest, and then the floor honoring the vault, and then he looked at her with eyes that held no contempt, only curiosity. They say your people run the plains until the world gives up, he said, the translator smoothing his river rock voice. They say you can kill with inches. Ava tapped her sternum. They say you can climb a storm. He smiled. Storms don't like to be climbed. Neither do humans, she said. The bell didn't chime. The vault inhaled, and the fight began on gravity's downbeat. Rune rode the swell, like a kite sailor rides a gust, hips and feet making alliances with weight. He moved to pin Ava to the floor with mass and intention, to make inches cost dollars and dollars cost lives. Ava accepted the first pin to buy information, body humming with strain, bones telling her what the vault would charge for every act of defiance. Then she paid in smaller coins angles, breath, friction stealing centimeters back from a creditor that wanted meters. The first exchange ended with no myth. Good. Myths want endings. Hunts want continuations. Rune's palms were calloused maps. When they met her forearms, she felt the topography of a life that had learned by falling and not dying. She redirected his grip, slid her shoulder under his center, and turned the pin into a tide pool where she could breathe. He flowed with it, unoffended by physics, and found a hold that threatened a shoulder. She spun out because humans invented spinning when the world tried to keep them. The vault's breath thickened. Bodies got heavier. Rune smiled like someone who had been paid in this currency his entire life. Ava let gravity make promises and then refused to honor them. The refusal wasn't theatrical. It was quiet. An economy of movement that made spectators lean forward because they could feel value accrue in places they didn't have names for. In the second minute, she tested the myth everyone brought to her, the 18-inch gospel. Rune's throat was not the window. His breath was. She struck the ribs that pumped his storm, half-beat, quarter-beat, and watched endurance evaluate new terms. They traded without malice and without charity. When the vault exhaled, Ava moved like a story being told by a grandmother whose voice cracked at the right moments. When it inhaled, Rune anchored like a cliff that had chosen which waves to marry. The crowd's noise became weather. Ava's metronome ticked in her blood and then vanished, replaced by something older. She stopped thinking in beats and started thinking in animals, the way wolves bracket, the way cheetahs lie about direction, the way humans lie about being civilized and mean it right up until they don't. Vault's gravity held a mirror to every motion, and in that reflection, Ava saw choices stripped to bone, push and be pinned, yield and be drowned, cut the angle, and make the world misplace its footing. Rune shifted as if joints had learned polite disagreement with force. He wasn't fighting her so much as negotiating terms with a planet in miniature. She respected that. Respect doesn't slow knives. It hones them. She found his breath again, not to steal it, but to spend it at the wrong times. Humans are economies in motion, metabolic accountants, paying and saving in muscle and blood. Rune sensed the theft and tried to change the currency. He climbed into clinch, hips low, feet wide, turning the vault's inhale into a wall he could press her against without touching the wall. The trick was beautiful, like watching a ship tack into wind perfectly. Ava accepted the frame, then betrayed it with a small sin. She let one knee soften as gravity peaked, absorbing just enough to turn his line into an error. The error multiplied, as errors do, until his shoulder asked his spine a question he wasn't ready to answer. He let go before the math got mean. Predators survive by knowing when a cost curve goes vertical. Ava took space on the exhale and didn't chase. Chasing is for prey pretending to be brave. Hunters ambush time. The audience felt the refusal and made a sound like a storm, deciding to hold off another mile. The keeper of the vault, watching from the rim, folded her arms and nodded once to herself, the small salute of someone seeing. A new page added to a book she thought she knew. Asterisk, the choir's cousins were here, of course. Not the same faces, but the same hunger wearing different mouths. Ava could feel their fingers in the rhythm, not offsetting the bell, because the vault didn't ring, but smoothing the curve of gravity's breath to favor the climber's pacing. Tiny, legal manipulations justified as comfort bands for audience safety. Sponsors hate chaos that injures merchandise. Ava filed the pressure for later and worked the fight inside its tolerances. Run showed her something, then something none of the dossiers predicted. He stopped surfing gravity and started making it jealous. He grounded so hard that the floor confessed its secrets and used that confession to steal a beat from her stance. For a heartbeat, Ava was where he wanted her. Stacked, heavy, one joint out of alignment. He could have driven a finish through that window. He didn't. He glanced at the keeper, then eased off. Ritual. The vault was a temple to some, and temples ask offerings, not desecrations. Don't hold the blade, she said, voice flat in the iron air. If you do, it will cut you anyway. Rune's mouth twitched. The vault remembers arrogance. So do scars, she said, and moved. She chose an old human lie. The shoulder feint that telegraphs a strike to face and brings a knife to liver. Rune didn't buy it. He was too honest for that kind of marketplace. Good. She wanted him to refuse. The second intent lived behind the first. Her hips slid past his line, and her forearms stamped the ligament above his knee. A whisper of violence that promised a future collapse. He shifted to protect the joint. In that shift, the fight turned, not because of damage, but because of information. He now had to protect a hinge that might fail. She had planted an IOU in his gait. Gravity swelled to a tide crest. Ava let it pull her down, palms slapping the iron in a drumbeat that answered the vault's breath. The sound wasn't for theater. It was for nerves, hers and his, a reset signal that cleared noise. She sprang as weight eased, body writing cursive along a line no one else could read. Rune tried to meet her in the air, but he lived on ground, and this was sky. Her knee met sternum not to break, but to teach the diaphragm to panic. Panic is loud. She retreated as his breath hitched, giving him room to keep his feet. Kindness? No. Space is a trap that bodies fill with bad decisions. He didn't make the bad one. He stood into his fear and owned it, eyes calm, mouth set. The crowd recognized the dignity and offered respect the way crowds do. Noise turned into temperature. Ava tasted salt and iron and something like memory. She thought of planes and red skies and metronomes that didn't keep perfect time because life didn't either. She thought, too, of the choir and of the way they would sing in the vault if no one silenced them. Again, Rune said, and the word was not a plea. She obliged. They collided in the thick of breath, where moves cost double. He tried to staple her to the floor with angles. She unstitched the seam. He turned the world into a hill. She found the switchback. He offered an exchange. She offered a tax. In the fifth minute, a sound like glass under pressure hummed through the ring. The keeper's eyes snapped to the oversight booth, where engineers watched curves like augurs reading blood. The hum meant the curve was being touched. Ava smiled without humor. Later, she told the hum, and finished the stanza with a hook to Rune's oblique that stole the next breath before it was born. He sank to a knee, because that is what bodies do when oxygen goes missing. She gave him the second it takes to repatriate air. He rose, slower, wiser. Myths want domination. Ava wanted continuity. Continuity makes legends. And legends survived sponsors. Between rounds that didn't exist because the vault did not believe in bells. Only in breath Ava stood near the rim long enough to let her eyes find the booth. A man with priestly calm and an accountant's frown watched the gravity curve like it owed him rent. His hands never touched a control. His eyes did. He was the choir's cousin, and he was good. Good enough to hide his work inside safety margins. Good enough to believe no one could smell time in the lungs of weight. Ava walked a semicircle, not to chase an angle on Rune, but to step into the pipe of air that fed the vault's control room. Smell is data. Data is leverage. The air carried coolant, hot metal, and the clean, sharp odor of ionized dust. No human fingerprints, but human taste. The choir was everywhere, and they wore sanctity like sunscreen. She exhaled once, slow, and went back to the center, because the hunt inside the fight had to end before the larger hunt could begin. Rune bowed, not deeply, but honestly. Your people have changed my people's prayers, he said. They pray not to avoid you, but to be worth your attention. Ava felt the compliment try to climb inside like a parasite. She denied it entry. Prayer won't help, she said, but practice will. He grinned, storm gray eyes flashing like slate in rain. Then practice with me. They did. The next exchange was not spectacle. It was a private conversation between predators, broadcast to billions and misunderstood by most. Ava tested his left leg again, not to collapse it, but to see if the IOU still lived. It did. He redistributed weight as smart accounting as gravity dipped. She fed him a rhythm that would have broken other climbers. Staccato high-low, pause, surge. He answered with a leg weave that threatened her base, and then didn't, because he saw the sting in its tail. Their bodies laughed together without sound. She needed an ending. Not a mythmaker those she already had in surplus, but a bookend that would teach the choir a lesson about meddling in temples. She let Rune push her toward the rim, where the vault's breath tugged at balance more greedily. He believed she was tiring. She let him believe, because truth is a tool, and so is deception. He framed her hips, set his feet, and began the clean, brutal work of making space disappear. She let space collapse. Then she built a door where none was supposed to exist. The door was old human craft, the misstep that isn't, the collapse that reloads, the invitation that insults gravity into overreaching. As the vault inhaled, she dropped her center through his frame, like a key finding a lock and spun. Not a gymnast's spin, a predator's. Rune's grip followed because clever hands do, and in following, he gave her his back for a breath and a half. That was all the invitation she needed to set 2 fingers along a neural seam at the base of his skull and a forearm across a levered shoulder. No choke, no kill, a command. Bodies listened to certain commands if spoken in the right language. Rune stilled. The vault exhaled. Ava eased him forward and let him choose the floor or the knee. He chose the knee, a concession that preserved dignity. She released the lever and retreated 1 pace to erase the shape of ownership from the air. The keeper lifted her hand. In the vault, that meant enough. Fights can end by consent when both predators still have teeth. The crowd's noise wasn't a scream. It was a pulse approval from a species aggregate that had watched a fight and seen a lesson. Ava bowed to Rune. He rose, touched the floor, then his chest, and smiled with his whole face. When I prayed, I asked for a storm worth climbing, he said. Today I learned storms ask to be climbed well, and to be left standing, she said. He laughed, and the sound made the vault feel less like a tomb of gravity and more like a school. Ava walked to the rim as medtechs checked. Rune's pupils and pride. The keeper met her with the economy predators, reserved for real conversation. You smelled them, the keeper said. Ava nodded. They think temples should tithe to markets. The keeper's mouth hardened into a cliff. Not in my vault. Ava tilted her head toward the booth. Then help me pull the choir's cousin down from his altar. They entered the oversight corridor in a procession of 2. No guards. The keeper didn't need them. The door yielded to her palm and her reputation. Inside, the man with priestly calm had already stood, hands visible, face composed. Safety margins, he said, before accusation could settle. Spectators. Liability. We sell predictability. Iva finished, tired of the liturgy. You think gravity should be fair? The man blinked, thrown. Fair? Fairness is for optics, she said. This is worship. You don't smooth the voice of a god because donors complain it's loud. The keeper's forearms did a lot of talking without moving. Pack your tools, she said to the man. Your choir sings elsewhere. He looked to Ava for appeal and found none. Humans change the market, he said, as if she needed telling. Markets change temples. Ava set her grandmother's metronome on the console, wound it, and let its imperfect tick fill the room. Then let the temple change the market, she said. Start here? He left with his calm frayed. The keeper watched him go, and then watched the metronome. That keeps poor time, she said. It keeps living time, Ava answered. There's a difference. The keeper nodded and flicked a switch that severed the last authorized tether between the two. Vault's breath and any hand that wasn't the vault's. If they return, they will, Ava said. They always do. Predators circle. So do priests. In the docking tunnel, Sthur's message waited in the courier's narrow band. A board summons to the Spiral Council on Vesper Station, where rules were written and rewritten with ink made of money and fear. They want you to explain humans, Sthur's voice clicked. They want you to be a myth we can regulate. Ava watched the stars slip by like cold fires and felt the hunt stretch beyond domes and vaults. Then we'll bring them something better than a myth, she said to the empty cabin. We'll bring them the bill. Vesper Station wore law like jewelry, conspicuous, polished, and purchased from the same artisans who forged its exemptions. Suspended above a blue-white world, the Spiral Council's chambers spiraled inward like a shell that had learned to hoard whispers. Ava stepped from the courier into air that smelled of sterilized compromise and citrus meant to suggest neutrality. Star met her at the threshold, posture impeccable, eyes alert in the way of someone walking a blade between duty and survival. They want a story, he said without greeting. They'll call it testimony. Stories move markets, Ava said. Testimony moves knives. He twitched mandibles in a gesture humans had come to read as humor edged with worry. They've invited champions and sponsors alike. Priests of the choir are here under other names. Names are coats, Ava said. They come off when the work starts. She let her gaze drift across banners and biometric scanners and the silent hum of cameras, pretending to be architecture. The board had arranged a theater. She would refuse their choreography. The chamber was a bowl around a dais, where consensus wore a mask made of measured tone. Delegates from 47 polities arrayed their opinions like weapons sheathed in velvet. Behind them, in shadowed tiers, the sponsors sought guild creatures that smelled of stacked probabilities and controlled catastrophes. Ava's metronome lived in her pocket, wound and ready. A small clock that disobeyed perfect time the way she intended to disobey perfect optics. Captain Ava Reyes, the chair announced, voice amplified by a halo of acoustics crafted to flatter authority. The council recognizes your demonstrations have drawn galaxy-spanning attention. We convene to discuss standards for competitive safety, species parity, and market stability in the wake of human participation. The words were clean. The intent was not. Standards, parity, stability, codes for levers and cages. Ava let silence do its work until the room's nerves showed. Humans didn't invent the hunt, she said. We inherited it. We didn't break your arenas. We just reminded them they were supposed to be honest. A ripple went through the sponsors, a disturbance in a school of fish when a new current enters the reef. The chair smiled the way surgeons do before anesthetic. Honesty, Captain, is an aesthetic. We prefer safety. The vault's keeper would disagree, Ava said. So would a climber named Rune, who understands that worship without risk is choreography, not devotion. She didn't mention the choir by name. She didn't need to. The priests flinched in their seats under other titles. A delegate from the Tharun Compact leaned forward, slate-gray skin reflecting the chamber's light. Our athlete reports your restraint preserved his life and his honor, she said. He requests that regulations not shackle what makes contests worthy. But her eyes flicked to sponsors. We must survive the season. Star spoke then, voice crisp. The Proxima Volf Dome will adopt randomized phase offsets within a safety band anchored to cosmic noise. No sponsor will own the chime. No guild will nudge reaction time for narrative. A murmur. The council liked declarations that looked like concessions. The choir's cousin in a silk suit shaped his mouth into a catastrophe sold as a plan. Randomization introduces variability that increases injury risk, he said. Insurers will. Ava cut him off. Insurers will reprice truth and sell it back to you. Let them work. The chair's gaze hardened. We will not allow the spectacle to devolve into blood feuds. It already is one, Ava said, mild. Between those who sell the illusion of fairness and those who bleed for a living God called physics. The room bristled at God talk. Sponsors loathe metaphors that can't be amortized. She reached into her pocket and placed the metronome on the rail. Tick off, tick off. The sound was a pebble in the council's shoe. This is living time, she said. Not the time you print on schedules. A fourth elder's voice rumbled from a tier. We built the Halcyon Vault to remind ourselves that gravity has a voice. We will not have that voice dubbed by accountants. He didn't look at the silk suit, but everyone did. Momentum shifted, small as a half-degree turn that becomes a course change after 1,000,000 miles. The chair adjusted strategy. Very well. A pilot program, randomized offsets, transparent oversight, cross-species review. In exchange, humans will submit to metabolic baseline disclosures to ensure no enhancement regimes threaten parity. There it was, the cage wrapped in process. Ava kept her face still. No stimulants before matches. No more than the rest of you allow your champions. Blood tests disclosed. But parity isn't pretending we're identical. Humans are pursuit predators by history. Tharun are anchor sprinters. Vorth are climbers of storms. Parity is rules that prevent sabotage, not rules that deny nature. The chair inclined ahead, having gotten a concession to parade. Noted. Then the sponsor tier played its last rehearsed card. A hollow flickered with a compilation. 6 seconds of chun, 18 inches to the throat. Ava's hand at Rune's neck seam. A slowed frame of Vaskel's near collapse. These techniques, the silk suit said, target vulnerabilities not covered by current medical hardening. They go viral. Amateur circuits will die mimicking gods. We will be liable for the corpses. Ava didn't look away. Teach them better, or let them learn the old way. Pain was a teacher before money hired it to sell lessons safely. The chair ended it before metaphors caught fire. Standards Committee will draft revisions by quarter cycle. Translation. A holding action while sponsors. Regrew leverage. Ava gathered the metronome. Stir's shoulder brushed hers as they exited, a soldier's way of saying we made ground without saying it out loud. In the corridor, he exhaled like a cliff sloughing old rock. They didn't cage you. They never can, she said. They can only sell tickets to the attempt. Outside protocol, meetings get honest. A side chamber, too small for theater, held Vorth elder, Tharun delegate, a Kthari archivist with eyes like polished onyx, Star, and Ava. The elder spoke first. Markets will come for our temples again. The Tharun delegate shrugged a shoulder. Temples and markets share doorways. The archivist clicked softly. Doorways remember feet. Ava set the metronome down and let it tick. And we build new thresholds. The choir won't stop, Star said. They'll decentralize. Sell phase kits as safety upgrades to provincial domes. Whisper that randomization can be guided for crowd comfort. By the time the council notices, muscle memory across 100 arenas will be tuned to a lie. Ava nodded. So we do 2 things. We publish the randomizer as open protocol with public verifiability, and we make a story that outcompetes the choir's subscription. The archivist's eyes brightened. A story stronger than safety. Not bloodier, Ava said. Truer. A tour. Cross-architecture. No sponsor control of time. Fighters from species that can sign the covenant. No offsets, but the honest ones. No enhancements beyond baseline care. Fightcraft taught openly. To amateurs with the caveat that craft, without context, is how funerals breed. We stream it from our own lattice, with proofs that auditors can chew. The elder tasted the idea like a climber tastes wind. We call it the living time circuit. Names matter. Star repeated it, mandibles shaping syllables into something that sounded like stone learning to sing. The Tharun delegate smiled. Our anchors will hold your lines. The archivist lifted a small recorder. I'll write the charter and bury it in public memory with 1,000 mirrors. Break one, 10 more, reflected. Ava allowed herself a breath of satisfaction that didn't taste like sponsor air. We start where myths are born and break them. Proxima Volf, the vault, then somewhere the choir thinks it owns. They own Gennari Cascade, this star said. A triple lattice arena that changes vector mid-fight. Sponsors love it because chaos looks like a toy when the levers are hidden. Ava's mouth crooked. Then we play in their toy box and leave the lid off. The Elder's laugh was a landslide. The Cascade eats the unprepared. We're not unprepared, Ava said. We're hungry. Word moved. Before the council adjourned, rumors of a rogue circuit slithered through sponsor suites and fighter mess halls. Markets twitched. Insurers drafted new exclusions. Bettors invented narratives to fill the gap between fear and hope. That night, in a dockside bar where gravity algorithms made the floor feel like a ship in long swell, Ava met a face from the broadcast vascal, collarbone taped, eyes honest. He slid onto the stool like a predator choosing peace for an evening. Heard you're building a hunt that doesn't sell its teeth, he said. Building a place to practice under living time. Ava answered. He tapped the bar twice. A Theroon sign of agreement. My compact will send 3. Not me. Not yet. I owe my people wins inside the old walls before I step into new ones. She respected that order of operations. Bring your best who can learn, she said. Leave your myths at the door. He smirked at the human echo. You first. Always, she said. On departure day, the corridor to Dock 12 smelled of coolant and ambition. The courier's skin shone with the battered pride of ships that do more work than their paint. Star brought a small case and handed it over. Inside, a metronome not brass, but crystal, cut from the Proxima Volf dome's sacrificial shard, tuned to nothing the choir could predict. A gift from a city that decided to breathe, he said. Ava weighed it in her palm. It ticked irregularly. A cousin to her grandmother's. We'll make it choir-proof, she said. The living time. Circuit's first declaration went live as the ship undocked, pushed to public ledgers in a dozen languages. A charter that defined honesty as variance within physics, parity as transparency of baselines, and spectacle as a byproduct of truth. The choir's channels tried to drown it under a flood of safety concerns and market analyses. The flood met rock. Fighters riposted. Keepers signed. Auditors who loved puzzles broke the protocol open and found no handholds for sponsors. And because puzzles bring pride, they certified it loudly. Gennari Cascade rose like a glass storm over a cobalt sea. 3 interleaved domes sliding on gimbals that let vectors argue in public. The approach vector made pilots sweat. The choir had named it a masterpiece of safe chaos. Ava saw a playground for liars and hunters. They'll try to spin the lattice under our feet, Star said over the channel. Voice small against the Cascade's light. Let them spin, Ava answered. We brought our own time. The dockmaster's greeting was a velvet threat. Your circuit's proofs check out, she said. But my sponsors own the air. Air doesn't sign contracts, Ava said. The woman's mouth smiled. Her eyes refused. We'll see. In the locker carved into the Cascade's belly, Ava set 2 metronomes side by side, brass and crystal. She wound both. 2 imperfect ticks argued, and then found a braid. Living time, she whispered, and the arena hummed as if somewhere inside a god cleared its throat to speak without a choir. Gennari. Cascade was a cathedral of moving glass and argument. The 3 interleaved domes slid on gimbals. So subtly that vectors changed mid-stride, turning certainty into a rumor with each step. Dock crews in sponsor livery watched Ava cross the inlet tunnel with expressions that said compliance in public, sabotage in private. The dockmaster's velvet threat still lingered in corridor air, like perfume that refused to be forgotten. Ava carried 2 metronomes, brass and crystal, and the weight of a charter. That had made accountants invent new words for fear. Etha's briefing rode her ear on a tight beam. Local keepers, nominally independent, actually leased through Triarch Entertainment choir-aligned front. Expect safety harmonization, attempts via lattice phase, and air density drift. Ava's mouth twitched. They'll sing. We'll teach the audience to hear the off-key. She stepped into the prep hall, carved. Into the Cascade's belly, a place where fighters stretched under mirrors that didn't show flaws. Only story sponsors wanted to sell. She ignored them. Her warm-up was quiet tendon logic and breath that erased the room until only vectors remained. Opposition. Helix of the Arax, a species built like a mantis, decided to try poetry-long levers. Midline torsion, claws that articulated with delicate menace. Helix owned the Cascades housepelts, undefeated under this architecture for 6 cycles. His interviews were gentle, his fights were not. He was beloved because he made violence look like high calligraphy. Ava respected the craft and had no interest in being trapped inside its frame, the living time. Circuit's auditors set up on a mezzanine with open instruments, broadcasting seeds and checksums in real time. Transparency glowed ugly under sponsor lights, which is to say honestly. Triarch's rep approached with a smile polished by lawsuits. "We admire initiative," she said. "We caution against hubris." Ava set the crystal metronome on a ledge and wound it. The ticking did not apologize to the room. "Hubris is selling a god's voice as a ringtone," Ava said. The rep blinked, recalibrating to a vocabulary that wouldn't be bought. Helix found her in the corridor before the gate. A courtesy predators extend when they prefer clean beginnings. "Your circuit offends patrons," he said, translator misting his consonants. "Offense is a sign blood is awake," Ava answered, his head tilted, curious. "You fight inside moving hymns. We sing the Cascade, then sing loud," she said. "But don't touch time." He clicked, once the Arax version of a smile, and left a polite threat on the air like a calligrapher's final flourish. Gates. Light. The Cascade's hum lifted into registers that made bones pay attention. The domes began their spin argument, glass horizons sliding, air currents braided, hot over cold, changing how sweat decided to travel. The audience was a jeweled ocean at the margins, uncountable eyes hungry for proof that a human could not just survive a toy of gods, but make it confess its maker. Ava rolled shoulders, found both metronomes in her blood, and then let them fade until only Wolf rhythm remained. The chime was abolished on the circuit, replaced by visible signal flags, and a count that could be verified by any eye with math. The flag dropped. Helix did not so much move as appear along a new line, riding a glass seam that carried him sideways faster than ankles explain. His claws wrote for her a sonnet of cuts. Ava read the first couplet, skipped the rhyme, and rewrote the stanza with a pivot into negative space. 6 inches saved the throat that myths expected him to take. 18 inches had built a religion. She refused its altar today. Helix adapted, as masters do. He used the dome's contrary motion to double expose his body, an optical trick that pulled parallax across her eyes. An amateur would swing at the ghost. Ava cut the projector. She juked not at his shoulders, which lied, but at his tibia's truth. A human hand on glass, a skid, a tree of force drawn up through fascia, and her ulna printed a brief, rude note across the Arax's lateral line. Helix hissed music. The crowd loved that the score now had dissonance. Triarch tried their first hymn. Air density drifted 3% in Sector 4, high enough to tax anaerobic spikes. The auditors flagged it. The feed flashed the deviation. The audience saw the number. Transparency weaponized the sabotage. Helix's next entry arrived a half-beat early on the drift. Ava allowed gravity to borrow weight from her ankles and paid it back with torque. She entered his line wrong on purpose, arrived right by design, and showed her teeth in a small, private smile that Arax read as declaration. Respect received, mercy not offered. Minutes dilated into a street with no clocks. The dome's gimbals turned like decisions reconsidered. Helix went high, glass under his feet, telling him lies it told everyone who loved it. Ava didn't listen. She made a door in a wall that pretended to have none. The old human T slipped into a new lock. Palm to carapace, knuckles to tendon, foot to friction. She built a 3-point lesson. Your elegance is a weapon until someone kicks the chair it stands on. Helix stumbled 1 pace. Mistakes at speed become sermons. The Cascade took note. The arena responded like a living thing whose pride had been pricked. Vectors steepened. The glass hymn shifted to a minor key. Helix embraced it, claws carving arabesques that pressed. Ava toward a wedge where 2 domes' lips met and kissed, an engineer's nightmare and a poet's trap. The crowd inhaled in a single satisfying sentence. Sponsors leaned forward, because sponsors love a corner that collects blood. Ava placed her brass metronome on the floor seam as she slid. A talisman and a dare. Tick. The kiss near her boot missed a beat. Keelix saw the talisman and mistook symbol for weakness. He lunged to crush both metronome and myth in one gesture marketable as inevitability. Ava had wanted him to, not to protect the brass, but to place him where the glass lied worst. She sidestepped into an eddy of air that the auditors had mapped and shouted to the world. Keelix's foot bit nothing. His mass wrote a letter to Momentum that said please. Momentum refused. He overreached across the seam. Ava borrowed his reach and returned it as a gentle, ugly throw that put him on a lower plane where gimbals changed argument mid-fall. He landed with control because he was honest about gravity. He also landed where his favorite song didn't play. Triarch tried again, subtle as a tax. The flagger's timer drifted by a tenth. Not time optics. The feed noted it. Auditors screamed in numbers, and the crowd booed the number, not the fight. That mattered. For the first time in Cascade history, a sabotage failed not because an official blew a whistle, but because the audience had been given a ruler and chose to measure. Ava let the energy circulate. A predator's satisfaction at a herd, learning not to stampede off cliffs. Keelix stopped being calligraphy and became knife. He stripped ornament. The Arak's spine curved into a line that spoke of deserts and patient ambush. He had watched the 6-second gospel. He had chosen not to rewrite it, but to ignore it. He didn't guard his throat window so much as make the window irrelevant by changing the house it lived in. Ava honored that choice by offering a different ending. No 18-inch salvation, no cinematic collapse, just a series of small thefts of structure that robbed him of crescendo. She stole his shoulder in a half-beat. When Vectors gave her a bonus, a lesser fighter wouldn't notice. She stole his breath with a bump that looked like a misstep from the cheap seats and like a confession up close. She stole his confidence with a hand on a wrist that said you don't own that angle anymore. Keelix understood before the audience did. He smiled. Arak's smiles are a compression of mandibles, intimate as a scar. Clever, his translator whispered. Honest. Hers answered. The end came without drums. Keelix entered on a line that would have cut any other predator in half. Ava entered on a line that met his on terms gravity approved. Two bodies negotiated. The Cascade petitioned. Physics judged. The judgment was a soft crumble of Keelix's base, and a polite invitation for sleep whispered into a nerve. Seam at the jaw hinge. He took the invitation with grace, because masters do. Ava caught him before glass-bruised ego into foolishness, and set him on a plane that steadied as if the arena had decided dignity was worth sharing. Silence. Then, sound that wasn't a roar so much as agreement. The auditors projected the fight's checksum like prayer flags. The timer feed showed drift attempts in red, corrections in green, variants in gold. The crowd cheered the green and gold. Triarch's rep smile cracked like varnish under weather. Stairs exhale over the channel sounded like a besieged city remembering where its wells were. The dockmaster, velvet weapon holstered, sent a single-line message. You didn't break my house. You made it honest. Ava lifted the brass metronome. It had kept ticking through the Cascade's temptations, imperfect and stubborn. She set it beside the crystal cousin on the ledge and let both argue into a braid the microphones didn't understand. Keelix stood, bowed with the economy of a killer, and spoke not to her, but to the room. The hymn is better without a choir, he said. The Cascade hummed in agreement, class learning to sing in its own throat. After, fighters met in a side hall, where sweat cooled and truths warmed. Vascal sent a holla from light years away, collarbone healed. Smile as honest as failure and growth know how to be. 3 Tharoon anchors en route to your circuit, he said. They want to learn to lose correctly before they learn to win. Rune's face followed, lit by the vault's austere glow. Bring the circuit here again. The temple has room for pilgrims. Ava answered both with a simple image. 2 metronomes ticking out of sync. Then together, then apart. Living time. The choir retreated, not in defeat, but into a different shape. They would be back with new hymns, new safety, new knives made of numbers. The circuit's charter anticipated that. It wasn't a fortress. Fortresses fall. It was a habit taught to a galaxy. Watch the clock. Love the variance. Mistrust the smooth line that asks belief without proof. Habits survive when heroes die. That was the point. Ava packed the metronomes, nodded to the cascade as if to a dangerous animal that had chosen patience, and walked toward the next hunt. The living time circuit lit up 100 systems like nerve endings, waking from frost. And with each dome that chose variance over varnish, the choir learned a cruel lesson. Subscription safety doesn't sell when audiences can measure truth themselves. Gennari Cascade had sung without a choir. The Halcyon Vault had exhaled without a hand on its lungs. And Proxima Vault's crystal dome had learned to refract honesty, not odds. The sponsors called it a brand crisis. Fighters called it a season. Ava called it a beginning. Vesper Station called it to a close. The chair summoned a final assembly, a ceremony dressed as policy, to codify what markets could not kill. Delegates gathered like weather over a warm sea. The sponsor tier arrived in smaller numbers and larger suits. Star stood in the ingress with posture that said he'd survived the last winter, though it had taken teeth. The Vorth Elder brought Rune, healed and lean. The Tharoon delegate arrived with 3 anchors Vascal had recruited, eyes bright as knives learning ethics. Arax sent Keelix with wrist wrapped and smile unbroken. They came not as myths, but as practitioners of living time. Before the dais could speak, the station groaned the way large structures do when a new vector is forced upon them. The lights did not fail. They lied instead. Color temperature shifted, turning faces waxen and predatory by turns. The air tasted like an algorithm. Ava did not look up. She looked inward, where 2 metronomes ticked imperfectly, and found the braid between them. Incoming, Star said flatly. A choir splinter, or someone worse. Worse arrived, dressed as Mercy. The Hollas flared to life with a priestly face in a suit that bore no logo, only confidence. For too long, the voice said, we have allowed chaos to endanger lives. The circuit's romanticism endangers juveniles imitating gods. We offer a universal safety lattice, licensed freely, that hardens vulnerability and harmonizes time. Rune's hands curled into anchors. Keelix's claws whispered dissent along one another. The delegates listened, because they fear funerals. Ava let the voice finish its liturgy, and then walked to the center, as if the floor had requested. Show us your lattice, she said. The face smiled. It is beyond display. It is integrated across stations as we speak. We anticipated need. Gasps, anger, relief. Religions feel similar chemicals, whether they worship truth or comfort. You trespass, the Vorth Elder growled, mountain voice eroding velvet. We enforce compassion, the face said. Ask your insurers. Ava set the brass metronome on the dais rail and wound. It tick off, tick off. The sound broke the room's smoothness. Compassion doesn't start by lying to physics, she said. It starts by teaching people how not to die. A lattice responded to insult the way bureaucracies do. It tightened. Gravity shifted 1%, air dampened. Acoustic baffling altered resonant frequencies. 100 small hands closed on the same throat. The chair tried to call order and found the amplification eating her voice in algorithmic pity. The priest's face offered beneficent apology. Temporary discomfort, necessary for safety, the audience murmured. The way prey herds murmur when cliffs offer a softer landing. Ava refused the cliff. She lifted the crystal metronome, struck it once against the rail sharp, singing, and placed it beside the brass. The 2 ticks argued, and then found a shared stutter that lived between the lattice's harmonics. The auditors of the circuit, late but ready, deployed portable Cedars cheap, ugly devices that spat public randomness into the air like pollen no filter could fully exclude. You don't own time, Ava said, eyes on the priest. You rent attention. The lattice tried to harmonize the pollen. It failed, not because the devices were stronger, but because their variance multiplied audience attention into a weapon. Feeds lit with overlays the public had learned to read during the circuit. Green for acceptable variance, red for coercive smoothing, gold for honest unpredictability. The room watched the colors and chose. Delegates who had feared funerals felt their own wills stiffen the way muscle stiffens when it remembers labor. The sponsor tiers saw public mood escape their hands like a hawk refusing a glove. The priest changed tactics. If humans insist on romance, we propose a final test. Standardized arena. Standardized metrics. Human versus lattice. A demonstration streamed live. If you win, the lattice withdraws. If you lose, the circuit yields to universal safety. Isar whispered mandibles together in a prayer from a god he no longer believed in. Ava did not hesitate. Name the ring, she said. The smile sharpened. Proxima Volf, the place where your myth was born. We will make it gentle, make it honest, Ava said. Cameras loved the line. So did predators. The assembly moved as if pulled by an old tide. They went to the place where the galaxy had learned that 6 seconds could be an era. Proxima Volf shone like a memory. Crystal dome refracting starlight into a cathedral that had learned humility. The choir's lattice draped over it like a prayer shawl, woven from good intentions and control. The stands filled with a species chorus that had learned to count to 6 and then to count variants. Star stood at the rim, a custodian who had decided his job was not to sell spectacle, but to host honesty. If this goes wrong, he said, they will say I failed. If it goes wrong, Ava said, shouldering both metronomes, we will try again. The priest appeared on the hollow with a smile that had won committees. For the public good, all lethal vectors are damped. Impact thresholds reduced. Reaction windows widened to permit non-fatal outcomes. The screen italicized compassion. Ava set the brass metronome on the floor of the entrance tunnel and let it tick where her boots could feel it. She set the crystal cousin on the gate rail and listened until the 2 beats, braided into a groove no lattice could fully erase. She didn't need perfection. She needed someplace to stand. Her opponent walked out of the west gate, not Gorvac resurrected, not Vascal or Keelix, a human. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chon, the 6-second sermon in flesh, older by scars and calmer by defeats no broadcast had sold. The crowd became weather. The priest's face did not flinch. A demonstration between apex practitioners under safety, he intoned. Chun's eyes met Ava's and shared a paragraph no lattice could translate. They made us a myth, he said. Let's make them a practice. Flags, not chime. The lattice tried to widen reaction windows, making everything feel like fighting underwater. Chun moved first, not in speed, but in choice. He threw away the 18-inch gospel in front of the god that demanded it. He aimed to the side, to a place the lattice could not widen because it did not own hips. Ava joined the line, not to mirror, but to interfere kindly. The 2 humans wrote a duet of refusal. No throat myth, no cinematic collapse, no crescendo that markets could sell. Instead, they built small failures the lattice had no patches for. Dampers robbed impact, so they made impacts that weren't. Shun's shoulder brushed Ava's in a way that moved her foot into a place where gravity returned to favor. Ava's hand touched Chun's elbow in a way that made his torso read a different book. The lattice tried to harmonize breath. They held it at wrong times. It tried to slow the end. They refused to author one. The audience, trained by the circuit to love gold variants, watched red smoothing fail in public. The colors taught the room how to think. The priest, losing attention, invoked spectacle. The dome lights shifted to dramatize safe superiority, curtains of photons falling like gentle rain. Ava stepped into the rain and let it bead on skin. You don't understand why 6 seconds mattered, she said, voice picked up by mics that refused script. It wasn't the throat. It was the choice. We made a decision before the bell. To live in the moment the world orders us not to occupy. John's fist stopped an inch from her face, and her smile made the inch into a thesis. They ended it on their terms. A simultaneous step back, palms open, faces calm. No victor, no corpse, no myth to sell. Only proof that a lattice cannot own a decision. The auditors flashed green and gold over the dome, a harvest of honesty. The crowd roared agreement, not with a winner, but with a principle. Star sagged and then stood taller. A man watching a city choose what kind of cathedral it wanted to be. The priest made one last offer to fear. Without harmonization, children die. Ava picked up the brass metronome and held it up. Then teach them. Publish the craft. Open your temples. Show them how to fall and stand. Don't sell them a world that won't hurt them, and then build there. Parents when it does. Silence fell the way truth makes it fall. The fourth elder nodded, storm gray eyes bright. The Tharoon anchors tapped chests. Keelix clicked private respect. The chair spoke last, voice no longer flattered by acoustics, only strengthened by choice. The assembly adopts the living time protocols as minimum standard. Randomized offsets, public seeds, independent auditors, metabolic transparency, and consent-based endings where possible. The universal safety lattice is banned from clandestine deployment. Any harmonization beyond posted tolerances is sabotage. The vote wasn't unanimous. It was enough. Enough is what living systems use to become more after, in the tunnels where myths are stored until they rot or become tools. Chun stood with Ava in the prismatic gloom. I thought 6 seconds would be a prison, he said. They tried to make it 1, she answered. We made it a door. He nodded at the metronomes. Family? Habit, she said. The kind that survives heroes. The circuit didn't end. Hunts don't. They migrate. Temples learn to leave their gods' voices alone. Markets learn to price honesty, and failed often, as is their nature. The choir found other hymns. Audiences kept their rulers. Fighters kept their scars. And somewhere far from Proxima and Volth, on a plain under a red sky, no dome would ever own, a child ran until breath hurt, and learned that living time is what bodies make when no one sells it back to them.